The Avignon Papacy was the period from 1309 to 1377, during which 7 successive popes resided in Avignon rather than in Rome. This situation arose from the conflict between the papacy and the French crown, following the strife between Philip IV of France and Pope Boniface VIII, and the death of his successor Benedict XI after only 8 months in office. A deadlocked conclave finally elected Clement V, a Frenchman, as pope in 1305. Clement declined to move to Rome, remaining in France, and in 1309 moved his court to the papal enclave at Avignon, where it remained for the next 67 years. This absence from Rome is sometimes referred to as the Babylonian captivity of the papacy. A total of 7 popes reigned at Avignon, all were French, and they increasingly fell under the influence of the French crown. Finally, on September 13, 1376, Gregory XI abandoned Avignon and moved his court to Rome, officially ending the Avignon Papacy. Despite this return, following Gregory's death on March 27, 1378, the breakdown in relations between the cardinals and Gregory's successor, Urban VI, gave rise to the Western Schism. This started a second line of Avignon popes, now regarded as illegitimate and known as anti-popes. The second and final Avignon anti-pope, Benedict XIII, lost most of his support in 1398. Including that of France. Following 5 years of siege by the French, he fled to Perpignan on March 11, 1403. The schism ended in 1417 at the Council of Constance, after only 2 popes had reigned in opposition to the papacy in Rome. Avignon popes. Among the popes who resided in Avignon, subsequent Catholic historiography grants legitimacy to these. Pope Clement V, 1305 to 1314. Pope John the 22nd, 1316 to 1334. Pope Benedict XII, 1334 to 1342. Pope Clement VI, 1342 to 1352. Pope Innocent VI, 1352 to 1362. Pope Urban V, 1362 to 1370. Pope Gregory XI, 1370 to 1378. The 2 Avignon-based anti-popes were Clement VII, 1378 to 1394, Benedict XIII, 1394 to 1423. Benedict XIII was succeeded by 3 anti-popes, who had little or no public following, and were not resident at Avignon. Clement VIII, 1423 to 1429, Benedict XIV, 1424 to 1429 or 1430, Benedict XIV, 1430–1437. The period from 1378 to 1417, when there were rival claimants to the title of pope, is referred to as the Western Schism, or the Great Controversy of the Anti-Popes by some Roman Catholic scholars, and the Second Great Schism by many secular and Protestant historians. Parties within the Roman Church were divided in their allegiance among the various claimants to the office of pope. The Council of Constance finally resolved the controversy in 1417 when the election of Pope Martin V was accepted by all. Avignon and the small enclave to the east remained part of the Papal States until the French Revolution, at which time they became part of the French Republic in 1791. Background: temporal role of the Roman Church. The papacy in the late Middle Ages played a major temporal role in addition to its spiritual role. The conflict between the Pope and the Holy Roman Emperor was fundamentally a dispute over which of them was the leader of Christendom in secular matters. In the early 14th century, the papacy was well past the prime of its secular rule. Its importance had peaked in the 12th and 13th centuries. The success of the early Crusades added greatly to the prestige of the popes as secular leaders of Christendom, with monarchs like the kings of England, France, and even the emperor merely acting as marshals for the popes and leading their armies. One exception was Frederick II, who was twice excommunicated by the Pope during a single crusade. Frederick II ignored this and was moderately successful in the Holy Land. This state of affairs culminated in the unbridled declaration of papal supremacy, Unum Sanctum, in November 1302. In that papal bull, Pope Boniface VIII decreed that it is necessary to salvation that every human creature be subject to the Roman Pontiff. He followed up with a bull that would excommunicate the King of France and put the interdict over France, and to depose the entire clergy of France, when in September 1303, a French delegation forcibly brought the Pope to France. Beginning with Clement V, elected 1305, all popes during the Avignon Papacy were French. However, this makes French influence seem greater than it was. Southern France at that time had a culture quite independent from northern France, where most of the advisors to the King of France were based. The Kingdom of Arles was still independent at that time, formerly a part of the Holy Roman Empire. The literature produced by the troubadour age in the Languedoc area is unique and strongly distinct from that of royal circles in the north. Even in terms of religion, the South produced its own variant, the Cathar movement, which was ultimately declared heretical. The movement was fueled in no small part by the strong sense of independence in the South, even though the region had been severely weakened during the Albigensian Crusade 100 years before. By the time of the Avignon Papacy, the power of the French king in this region was uncontested, although still not legally binding. A stronger impact was made by the move of the Roman Curia from Rome to Poitiers in France in 1305, and then to Avignon in 1309, following the impasse during the previous conclave, and to escape from the infighting of the powerful Roman families that had produced earlier popes, such as the Colonna and the Orsini. The Roman Church looked for a safer place and found it in Avignon, which was surrounded by the lands of the papal fief of Comte de Venaissin. Formerly it was part of Arles, but in reality it was under the influence of the French king. During its time in Avignon, the papacy adopted many features of the royal court. The lifestyle of its cardinals was more reminiscent of princes than clerics. More and more French cardinals, often relatives of the ruling pope, took key positions, and the proximity of French troops was a constant reminder of where secular power lay. With the memory of Boniface VIII still fresh, centralization of church administration, the temporal role of the Catholic Church increased the pressure upon the papal court to emulate the governmental practices and procedures of secular courts. The Catholic Church successfully reorganized and centralized its administration under Clement V and John XXII. The papacy now directly controlled the appointments of benefices, abandoning the customary election process that traditionally allotted this considerable income. Many other forms of payment brought riches to the Holy See and its cardinals. Tithes, a 10% tax on church property, annates, the income of the first year after filling a position such as a bishopric, special taxes for crusades that never took place, and many forms of dispensation, from the entering of benefices without basic qualifications like literacy for newly appointed priests to the request of a converted Jew to visit his unconverted parents. Popes such as John XXII, Benedict XII, and Clement VI reportedly spent fortunes on expensive wardrobes, and silver and gold plates were used at banquets. Overall, the public life of leading church members began to resemble the lives of princes rather than members of the clergy. This splendor and corruption at the head of the church found its way to the lower ranks. When a bishop had to pay up to a year's income for gaining a benefice, he sought ways of raising this money from his new office. This was taken to extremes by the pardoners who sold absolutions for all kinds of sins to the poor. While pardoners were hated but needed to redeem one's soul, the friars who failed to follow the Church's moral commandments by failing their vows of chastity and poverty were despised. This sentiment strengthened movements calling for a return to absolute poverty, relinquishment of all personal and ecclesiastical belongings, and preaching as the Lord and his disciples had. A political church for the Catholic Church, an institution embedded in the secular structure and its focus on property. This was a dangerous development, and beginning in the early 14th century most of these movements were declared heretical. These included the Fraticelli and Waldensian movements in Italy and the Hussite movement in Bohemia. Furthermore, the display of wealth by the upper ranks of the Church, which contrasted with the common expectation of poverty and strict adherence to principles, was used by enemies of the papacy to raise charges against the popes. King Philippe of France employed this strategy, as did Emperor Louis IV. In his conflict with the latter, Pope John XXII excommunicated two leading philosophers, Marsilius of Padua and William Ockham, who were outspoken critics of the papacy, and who had found refuge with Ludwig of Bavaria in Munich. In response, William Ockham charged the Pope with 70 errors and 7 heresies. The proceedings against the Knights Templar in the Council of Vienna, representative of this time, reflecting the various powers and their relationships. In 1314 the Collegium at Vienne convened to make a ruling concerning the Templars. The council, overall unconvinced about the guilt of the order as a whole, was unlikely to condemn the entire order based on the scarce evidence brought forward. Exerting massive pressure in order to gain part of the substantial funds of the order, the king managed to get the ruling he wanted, and Pope Clement V ordered by decree the suppression of the order. In the Cathedral of St. Maurice in Vienne, the King of France and his son, the King of Navarre, were sitting next to him when he issued the decree. Under pain of excommunication, no one was allowed to speak at that occasion except when asked by the Pope. The Templars who appeared in Vienne to defend their order were not allowed to present their case. The cardinals of the Collegium originally ruled that they should be allowed to raise a defense, but the arrival of the King of France in Vienne put pressure on the Collegium, and that decision was revoked.